Hello and welcome back to the port. I'm the Gareth Major, and this is a summary and broad brush review of the British heavy cruisers, which are now fully researchable, having been released from early access as of the start of this patch. Now, as an introduction, this is going to be a broad brush review and summary covering the British heavy cruisers, the tech tree ones, from tier 4 to tier 7. Now, when it comes to covering these, it's just going to be quite generalistic. If you want more of a breakdown into the individual ships, then it's probably best to go look for the reviews of those ships on the channel. So the topics, initially we're going to be looking at the traits of these cruisers. Now these are going to be just the general traits rather than individual specific traits and comparisons. And so we're just going to be looking at each category. Those categories are going to be survivability, artillery, torpedoes, maneuverability, concealment and consumables. Another topic will be commanders. We'll be taking a brief look at what available commanders there are and what they offer. We'll also take a look at playstyles, just a generalist idea on how to play these cruisers, or exactly how I've been playing them. Obviously, your mileage may vary. We'll also take a look at the summary, where we would take away what we can from the previous categories and just give it a nice little summary, tie it up with a bow and see how we go. Now, some of this is, as I've said, based on my own opinions, and therefore your mileage may vary and your experience may vary as well. These cruisers may not be for everyone. Some people are going to love them, some people are not going to love them. Like I very much say, it's horses for courses. Not everyone's going to like the same flavour ice cream. So, starting off, let's look at those traits, those tier 4 to tier 7 British tech tree heavy cruisers. So starting off with survivability, they have among the highest base HP for their tier. They're always being in the top 3. Now sometimes they're the runaway winner, other times they're second or third place, but generally they're up there in that top 3, leading the pack, I guess you could say. Now, they also have the highest HP pool at all of their tiers due to their repair parties. From tier 4 to tier 6, it's not common for a cruiser to have a repair party, and when it does have a repair party, the amount of HP it repairs per second is based as a percentage of its overall HP base. So when you consider that they already have quite a high base HP, having a repair party brings some of that HP back as well. Means they're in a quite a good position for the amount of HP pool they have. And then when it comes to tier 7, obviously all cruisers do have repair parties, but with the British tier 7s, they do have super heals. That means that the amount of HP that they recover per second from the repair parties is exceptionally more than any of the other nations, I guess you could say. So when it comes to that, it also means that when it comes to the tier 7, our Warships does have a nice HP pool. Now, when it comes to the armour, these are usually quite lightly armoured cruisers. The Hawkins looks a bit odd because she actually does have some thicker armour on the belt and stuff. But when it comes to the, say, tier 5, 6 and 7, the Devonshire, the Surrey and the Almore, the armoured belt isn't looking as substantial, I guess you could say. Now, when it comes to most of these cruisers, they're only really capable of angling against the smaller calibers of battleship guns at their tiers. However, they do have this really odd trait. They have a reasonable armoured deck, which can bounce high caliber battleship AP. It's a very strange trait. It's not exactly one that I'd say base your playstyle off of, but it is amusing when it does happen. Another nice trait with these British heavy cruisers is they do have the best or joint best torpedo damage reduction. So their torpedo bulges is actually quite effective. So that does help with their survivability. Going on to the artillery, we're practically always looking at having 8-inch guns at all tiers, apart from the tier 4 where it has 7.5-inch guns. Now, these are always slightly below average number of guns being carried, so not exactly got a lot of barrels pointing down range. Now, you do have an acceptable range. It's not great, but it's not poor. You're usually mid-table, give or take. Now, you do have a slower than average reload for your guns for their tiers. However, if you compare them directly to just heavy cruisers with similar caliber guns, then the actual reload is actually quite competitive. Now, they do have this very interesting trait where they have a very fast turret traverse, especially considering the 8-inch gun caliber in the turrets and comparing that to some of the other nations' heavy cruisers. Now, they do have joint best or close to best HE shell damage, so the HE shells really do smack them about a bit. And also they have the joint best or close to best fire chance as well. So very much these guns are orientated around the high explosive shell, which is very clear when you start taking a look at the AP shells. You can see that they do have an above average AP shell damage, but it's not great if you compare it directly to the heavy cruisers. Now, taking those reload times and those shell damages into account, what are we looking at for DPM wise? Well, you do have a below average high explosive DPM if you include all the tech tree cruisers, but if you separate out just the heavy cruisers, you're always looking at having the best to joint best high explosive DPM. However, same can't be said for AP DPM. You're looking at having a very poor AP DPM. Now, you do have a below average fires per minute when it comes to your high explosives. However, again, positioning yourself against the other heavy cruisers, you are looking to be in quite a nice position, always being up there near the top. Now, when it comes to torpedoes, you're always equipped with torpedoes, which is quite nice. You're not going to be put in a situation like the American tech tree where you don't have torpedoes. Now, you're always equipped with a single launcher per side, which has quite reasonable torpedo angles, and it does have that British capability of sequentially firing those torpedoes, which does mean that you can kind of tailor your torpedo spread to the threat as necessary, I guess you could say. Now, you always have an above average torpedo damage, so tier for tier, your torpedoes do hit quite hard. They don't hit as really hard, but they hit just hard enough, I guess you could say. Now, the torpedo range and speed is pretty average per tier, give or take, depending on the tier. And they have an average detection range as well, so people are going to be seeing them pretty much as per everyone else's torpedoes. Maneuverability wise, you're either the slowest or among the slowest for the tier, so you're not going to be motoring around the map at any time fast. Now, your turning circle, your position in regards to your turning circle and in comparison to the other ships at your same tier tech tree ships, you are looking at your position drastically changing between the tiers. Sometimes you're very good, sometimes you're pretty poor. So there isn't really like a trend when it comes to the turning circle. However, there is a trend when it comes to the rudder shift, and you are looking at being among the slowest for your tier at every tier. Now, an interesting one to mention about maneuverability is obviously you cannot take propulsion mod with these British heavy cruisers, and the reason being is it's almost kind of built into these cruisers already, so it does mean these cruisers do have a fast acceleration because it's kind of already built in. The only thing I could say that maybe they suffer with is they accelerate fast, but their deceleration or like coming to a stop can be a bit awkward. So it's just learning that kind of those traits of their acceleration and their deceleration, and then trying to be aware of it and maximize it, minimize it as and when you can. Going on to concealment, you are looking at being better than average concealment, either second or third best. So it's pretty good, really. Your main competitors are obviously the British light cruisers and the Italian cruisers. Going on to the consumables, you do have standard sonar per tier. Basically nothing special, but you've got it. It's very nice to have. Now, you do have repair parties at every tier, and these do really help with the survivability of these cruisers. And especially when you consider that the tier 7 comes with that super heal, and the tier 7 also has that ability to take radar, which is quite a nice little trait. It can help quite a bit at those high tiers, especially if you end up in a destroyer heavy game. So that's the ships all covered off, so let's take a look into the commanders. Well, your main options are going to be Fraser, Tennant or Jellicoe. However, there is the additional Azure Lane commander, Azure Lane Belfast. If you already have her, then you might want to consider her, or we'll consider her for you, I guess you could say. However, the Azure Lane commander, if you don't have her already, then potentially it's something that you might be able to pick up if they do future wave drops. Now, from the base commanders, so none of the event commanders or anything like that, they do have access to quite reasonable base traits. Fraser is going to improve your base speed, which is quite nice. That does mean that it's helping these cruisers be a little bit faster. It's not a great percentage, but it's better than nothing, I guess you could say. Tennant's got a nice base trait as well, where he can reduce the incoming damage to your citadel. Now, considering that these cruisers aren't the greatest armor-wise. That can help you with survivability. Now, Jericho, he's got an interesting trait where he increases the duration of your repair party. Now, that's a nice little trait in that all of these will come with repair parties. That does mean you're going to be getting more HP per repair party, which means you're going to be increasing your HP pool. So, again, that sort of increases your survivability. However, if you do have a Zerlane Belfast, her base trait is a bit situational, I guess you could say. It's reduced detectability range when firing from smoke. Now, these cruisers don't have smoke, and so if you're playing solo, it's a really strange ability to go for. If you're playing in a division, say you're playing with a destroyer or a smoke cruiser, it potentially could be quite a nice little trait to buddy up if you know you're going to be working with smoke. But most of the time, you're probably not going to be working with smoke, and it kind of feels like it's a bit of a wasted trait. So going over the commanders, Tenant, he can offer the most in regards to maneuverability due to his ability to increase his speed and rudder shift. So you can take Belarus's steer clear and full speed ahead, and that'll give you basically a maximum speed, maximum rudder shift build from the commander, excluding inspirations and modules and things like that. Now, he also does help with survivability. Obviously, he has the ability to take the ingenious trait, which helps with knowing how many ships have their main battery aimed at you. But also, you've got his base trait, reducing incoming damage to your citadel, and the ability with the legendary trait to take fully packed, which is going to give you an additional repair party, again increasing your HP pool. Now, Fraser can offer a balanced commander, I guess you could say, balancing between offensive and defensive traits. He will offer you slightly less maneuverability because he doesn't have full speed ahead, and he will probably offer you slightly less survivability because you're not going to be able to have that reduced incoming damage to your citadel or that ingenious ability. However, you can maximize some of those offensive traits because you can improve your fire chance, or you can improve your torpedo range or your main battery range. And also, although you don't have full speed ahead, so you lose a bit of speed in rudder shift, you will gain some speed from his base trait as well. So he's a bit of a nice balance. Personally, usually I'll go for Fraser, but I do have Tenant as well in the wings, and I kind of switch between the two depending on the ship in question. Now, Jellicoe, he's not the strongest commander, I have to confess. His base trait's nice, and you do have an ability to mix and match, and I think he does allow for some niche builds. You could be looking at using a stealth build if you use Look at Me Now, so you could really reduce the detectability of these heavy cruisers. You could make them quite intriguing from that point of view. It means you could get closer before you open fire, but it's not the strongest build. Now, obviously, that brings us to Zerlane Belfast. Again, I've always had this kind of view with her that she's very much a slightly compromised commander. Because she doesn't offer fully packed, you're losing a repair party from that. And then her base trait is very situational. And when it comes to her skills, I kind of feel that sometimes the choices are a little weak. There's not really a strong build. It kind of feels like no matter what you'll do, you'll end up with a slightly compromised build. Obviously, it's not going to be as compromised as Jericho, potentially. Although Jericho, you're probably looking at making a niche build. With a Zerlane Belfast, you're probably trying to make do with what you've got. So when it comes to the skills that I would recommend, honestly, you've already heard me recommend fully packed. The reason being is as a legendary trait, this gives you an additional consumable, which is going to be your repair party, your sonar, your catapult fighter, or radar, depending on what you choose at tier 7 / what happens at the other tiers. And I kind of feel that this is quite a strong ability for the British heavy cruisers, as having that repair party is a nice little ace up their sleeve, and having an additional one does improve your long-term survivability. Also, it does have that ability where it improves the reload time of your consumables if there's a friendly ship within proximity, which again is quite nice. It means that if you do take a bit of a smacking, you can kind of sulk off, get buddy up with someone and quickly just chain off a couple of repair parties and get yourself back into the fight. Now, I kind of feel with these cruisers, skills that improve the speed and the rudder shift of these cruisers is very helpful. Those traits being full speed ahead, Velorucius, and steer clear. It's one of the reasons why Tenant I feel is quite a strong commander, because he does really reduce that rudder shift. And also, it's one of the reasons why when it comes to inspirations, I usually do look at Von Muller and Azur Lane Baltimore, because they again improve speed and rudder shift. And therefore when it comes to modules, I'm always taking rudder shift modules as well. So the reason why is this helps with open water kiting. It does mean you can change direction quite rapidly and make those turns a lot more quicker. Now, additional gun range and rate of fire and fire chance and things like that, they're nice traits to have, because obviously they do help your offensive capabilities. However, I would say initially focus on survivability and kind of get into the swing of these cruisers, get them fully upgraded, get to know them, and then once you've got to know them, work out what defensive and maneuverability traits that you're willing to sacrifice in order to improve your offensive capabilities. Then that way you're making little changes to try and get bigger rewards. It's one of the reasons why I usually start off with Tenet in these cruisers, because that maximizes my rudder shift. And then once I've kind of got used to these cruisers and I know how they act in the water and stuff, and I got them fully upgraded, then I change to a Fraser build where I then max out the range of these guns, and I improve my fire chance on top of that, and just start getting a bit more offensive capabilities with my commander on them. Now, obviously, it's all down to what you're willing to sacrifice. So sometimes it might be just best just to stick with Tenant and keep that maneuverability. It's all down to what you're willing to trade in order to gain those offensive capabilities. Going on to the playstyle, well, I guess we've kind of already hinted towards it when we've been talking about the commanders and the traits. They're very much on par, I guess you could say, with most heavy cruisers in the game. They usually are quite successful at open water combat, kiting in, kiting out. Obviously, moseying up behind an island, moseying up inside a smoke screen are going to be things that they are still going to be quite capable of doing, but it doesn't mean that's the only trick up their sleeve. If you can improve their rudder shift, then they do make quite nice kitey cruisers. One of the tricks of kiting, though, is obviously keeping at range against battleships. That way you're maximizing the time from when they fire their guns to when the shells land, which also means that you're maximizing your ability to respond to those incoming volleys. You're also then therefore maximizing your ability to change course and change direction and change speed, and therefore making it more difficult for the enemy battleships to actually lead the target enough. Now, using this to your advantage, it does mean you can kind of read those incoming volleys and therefore reposition and dodge. Now, they are quite capable cruisers at cruiser duels, which is quite interesting. It's when you end up with like a 1v1 cruiser. Usually you find yourselves just closing in and going in for that kill. Obviously, having torpedoes is really important. If you know what it's like to play in an American cruiser, if you get into a cruiser duel, it kind of hurts not having those torpedoes. And if you've done it in a Japanese cruiser with those almost like rear quarter facing torpedoes, you know that kind of hurts. You have to almost stick your broadside on. So with these British cruisers, having those sequentially able to fire good torpedo angles and having torpedoes, that really does help in the cruiser duels. However, with the British cruisers, although you can usually bow tank 8-inch guns, it's still going to hurt quite a lot. So take that into account. And if you want to kick your rear turrets out or kick your front turrets out, depending if you're kiting in or out, you have to be careful, because you are going to be opening yourself up. So sometimes kicking out to get those turrets on is not always going to be the best thing to do. But in general, they seem to be quite capable cruisers, and I have found them very enjoyable. Basically, almost going into the summary, in comparison to the other cruisers, they aren't hugely different, but they are very effective, high explosive throwers. You can kind of see it when we talk about the guns. Very good high explosive shells, very good fire chance. So that's really quite nice. Now, they do have this nice trait of having those fast traverse speeds on their turrets, which is a nice ability. It means you can kind of keep up with a fluid situation. Now, not normally, you don't want to be finding yourself in situations where you're in among islands and you're having to switch your guns from one side to another side to respond to changes in threats. However, they do have that ability, which is quite nice. It's not like, say, sometimes in a Japanese cruiser, or some of the American heavy cruisers, it's kind of like there's a target on your right and suddenly something pops up on your left. You kind of can't do anything about it, or it's going to take a while for you to do something about it, and you might have to put your ship in an awkward position in order to deal with the changing threat. With the British, you can kind of keep your positioning, and your turrets are going to turn very rapidly. So that's quite a nice little trait. Obviously, we kind of already mentioned it before, but they do have this reasonable torpedo armament. It's not super offensive like the Japanese or the Italians, I guess you could say, with those very long-range torpedoes. You're able to throw them out. Obviously, the Italian torpedoes are more like aerial denial, whereas the Japanese are quite hard-hitting long-range torpedoes. But it's nice to actually have torpedoes with a reasonable range that you can kind of rely on, unlike, say, the Russians, where you've only got very close-in point defense torpedoes, or the Americans, where you do have no torpedoes at all. Now, when it comes to survivability, I guess you could say that they don't have the greatest armor. That has to be said. But then again, if you compare them to some of the light cruisers, it's not that bad either. And then having those repair parties really does help with the longevity of these ships in the game. It gives a player the ability to make a mistake and survive, but also it means that when it comes to the end game, you can keep yourself going. You can hit another repair party and keep yourself going, unlike some of the other nations where once you get whittled down to your last few points of HP, you're pretty much just pretty much an easy kill or an easy meal for the enemy team. You kind of got to break off if you want to try and help your team win. You're probably better off going to hide at the back of the map rather than handing yourself over to the enemy team. With the British ones, you can kind of like take a bit of a breather, crack off a couple of repair parties, and then get stuck back into the fight. It kind of gives you that almost like brawling ability, I guess you could say. You can keep coming back, keep getting back up sometimes, which is quite nice. Means that you can get into the fight, take a hit, break off, heal up, and come back into the fight. So that's why, another reasons why I always say, let's try and take fully packed on these, get yourself that additional repair party. That's going to give you that bit more longevity, a bit more survivability. Well, that is pretty much everything regarding these cruisers and my points of view and stuff. Hopefully there will be a playlist appearing on the end screen, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And as always, down in the description is the link to Patreon if you want to support the channel on Patreon, and the email address to the channel if you want to send in any of your own game captures for our community spotlight video. So until next time, I'm the Galloping Major, and back to the port.
Hey, hey, clear the way, here comes the Galloping Major. Get out of the way there, you fellows, unless you want me to run you down. I guess this is the life. Now, hey, hey, clear the way, here comes the